All right, readers, we're going to get started with chapter 22 and 23. You out in the woods with that girl again? His father asked as soon as Rob stepped into the room. Yes, sir, said Rob. Look over here, son. His father was standing by Rob's bed. Sir, said Rob. His heart sank. He knew what his father had found, the meat. He had hidden it under his bed until it was time to go and feed the tiger again. Where'd this meat come from? His father asked, pointing at the bloody brown bag. Without thinking, Rob said, Bucamp. Bucamp, his father repeated in a low, dark voice. Bucamp? He don't hardly pay me enough to get by. Now he's given us his rotten meat. He thinks I ain't man enough to put meat on my own table? Rob wanted to say something, but then he thought of Bucamp and held his tongue. I ought to teach him a lesson, his father said. The cords in his neck stood out like twigs. He kicked the bag of meat. I oughta, he said, making me work for less than nothing, giving us rotten meat. He went and stood in front of the gun case. He didn't unlock it. He just stood and stared and cracked his knuckles. Daddy, said Rob, but he couldn't think of anything to say after that. His mother had always known how to calm his father. She would put her hand on his arm or say his name in a soft, reproachable voice, and that would be enough. But Rob didn't know how to do those things. He stood for a minute more, and then he walked over to the bed and grabbed a piece of wood and his knife. As he left the room, his father was still standing at the locked gun case, staring through the glass at the deer hunting rifle as if he was trying to will the gun into his hands. Rob walked over to the Kentucky Star sign. He sat down underneath it and leaned up against one of the cold, damp poles and started to work on the wood. But his head was too full of his father's anger and Sistine's tears. He couldn't concentrate. He looked up at the dark underside of the sign and recalled lying on the blanket, staring up at a big oak tree. His mother had been on one side of him, and his father, asleep, snoring, had been on the other. He remembered that his mother had taken hold of his hand and pointed to the sun, shining through the leaves of the tree, and said, Look, Rob, I have never in my life seen a prettier color of green. Ain't it perfect? Yes, ma'am, he said, staring at the leaves. It looks like the original green, the first one God ever thought up. His mother squeezed his hand hard. That's right, she said, the first one God ever thought up, the first evergreen. You and me, we see the world the same. He concentrated on that green. He let it seep through the crack of his suitcase of knot thoughts and fill his head with color. He wondered if Willie Mae's cricket had been the same bright and original green. That's what he thought about as he carved. And so he wasn't surprised when he stopped and held the wood away from him to see a wing and a beak and a tiny eye. It was Cricket, Willie Mae's cricket, come into life under his knife. He worked on the bird for a long time until it looked so real that he half expected it to break into song. When he finally went back to the room, he found his father asleep in the recliner. The gun case was still locked and the bag of meat was gone. He wouldn't be able to feed the tiger in the morning. He would have to wait until Bucamp brought another package. Rob went and stood over his father and stared down at him. He looked at his heavy hands and the bald spot in his nodding head. He was memorizing him and trying at the same time to understand him, to make sense out of him, out of his anger and his quiet, comparing it to the way he used to sing and smile when his father jerked awake. Hey, he said. Hey, Rob said back. What time is it? I ain't sure, Rob said. Late, I guess. His father sighed. Go on and get me that leg medicine. Rob brought him the tube of medicine. Outside the motel, the world creaked and sighed. The rain started again, and his father's hands were gentle as he applied the ointment to Rob's legs. Chapter 23. The next morning, Rob put the keys to the tiger cage in one pocket and the wooden bird in the other and set out looking for Willie Mae. He found her in the laundry room, sitting on one of the folding chairs, smoking a cigarette and staring into space. Hey there, she said to him. Where's your lady friend at? School, said Rob, but today's only a half day. He kept his hands in his pockets. Now that he stood before Willie Mae, he was afraid to give her the bird. What if it was wrong? What if he had carved it wrong and it didn't look anything like Cricket? What you giving me those shifty-eyed looks for? Willie Mae asked. I made you something, Rob said quickly before he lost his nerve. Made me something, Willie Mae said. For real? Uh-huh. Close your eyes and hold out your hand. I ain't, said Willie Mae, but she smiled and closed her eyes and put out her enormous hand and palm with the palm up. Rob carefully placed the bird in it. You can look now, he told her. She closed her eyes, closed her fingers around the little piece of wood, but she didn't open her eyes. She puffed on her cigarette, and the long gray ash of the end trembled. "Don't need to look," she said. The cigarette dropped ash to the floor. The ashes dropped to the floor. "I know what I have in my hand. It's cricket." "But you got to look at it and tell me if I did it right," Rob said. "I got to do nothing," said Willie Mae, "except stay black and die." She opened her eyes slowly, as if she was afraid she might frighten the little bird into flying away. "This is the right bird," she said, nodding her head. "This is the one." "Now you don't have to dream about him no more," said Rob. "That's right," said Willie Mae. "Where'd you learn to work a piece of wood like this?" "My mama," said Rob. Willie Mae nodded. "She taught you good." "Yes, ma'am," said Rob, and she stared down at his legs. "I know a wooden bird ain't the same as having a real one, though." "It ain't," agreed Willie Mae, "but it soothes my heart just the same. My dad said he ain't got no jobs for me until this afternoon. He said I should come help you out this morning." "Well," said Willie Mae, and she dropped the bird into the front pocket of her dress, "I could find you some way to help me." So Rob spent the morning following Willie Mae from room to room, stripping the dirty sheets from the beds. And while he worked, the keys jingled in his pocket, and he knew that soon Sistine would be out of school and that she would again demand that he unlock the cage and let the tiger out.